We'll be doing just this one reading this week by Chris Ingraham, this chapter toward an algorithmic rhetoric. The notes have been posted, and then I've also recommended a viewing for you. If you haven't already seen this documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, please check it out. It's not mandatory, it's not required. There might be like a bonusy type thing built in around that viewing, but it's also just a really interesting, fascinating, engaging narrative about the power of digital processing and how much stuff it's in, how much it influences us, how much this kind of gold rush for private personal data has like shaped everything about tech, the kind of culture of tech and digital tech and sort of the whole social media phenomenon and what's going on there. So I do encourage you to check out Social Dilemma. Read it in conjunction with the piece by Ingraham. I think this also builds really nicely off of the work of Davis, which again extends the work of McLuhan, which itself builds off or goes along with the work on like nudging and captology. So I do really think these final weeks are all quite tightly related and building and elaborating on the work of the other stuff. So the way I was thinking about the algorithmic rhetoric stuff here today is thinking about algorithms, but I still had the Davis stuff on artifacts kind of echoing around in my thoughts. And so I think we could do an interesting and very useful kind of artifact analysis of algorithms, thinking about mechanisms and conditions, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff that factors into this chapter. So the first thing, of course, is what's algorithms? Like, why are we talking about algorithms? I wonder how much of your lives recently have been like taken over by hearing about algorithms or people talking about algorithms and this constant, at least in my world, like algorithm. These are these invisible, immaterial things that create so much of the reality that we now experience on a day-to-day basis. And so it's like we need to figure out what these things are and how they're working and how they're wielding this kind of power and influence over us. And what aspects of this could be considered rhetorical, communicative, persuasive, and what to do about all that, right? And so what's an algorithm? Well, as he starts off by saying, it's basically just a kind of set of like instructions, like a recipe. Recipes are often cited as like the non-digital example of an algorithm. And as I think everyone knows, I'm a food guy. I love to cook. I even create recipes sometimes. So I'm pretty well versed on recipes and this idea of like if you open up a book, I got a bunch of recipe books right down there. If you open up any given book and you just look at a recipe and if you follow it like perfectly and if the instructions are coded correctly and coded accurately and if it's all written well, that's the first part, right? Is that thinking about Davis here, the design. If you get the design and the coding right, and it's clear and everything connects, and you follow that design to the letter, you ought to end up with the perfect leg of lamb or ossobuco or loaf of bread or chocolate souffle or whatever it is you're doing. The inputs, which are your ingredients following the instructions, should yield a guaranteed output. That idea of the certain outcome. Now, certain has kind of two meanings. Certain as in like particular, right? A certain thing, this certain thing, right? But it's also about absoluteness, right? Certain as in guaranteed, as in we know for sure, right? So this idea of a set of instructions or a set of steps that give rise to a guaranteed outcome. That's really mostly what we're most interested in with algorithms. And so the first couple of points here are hitting on that idea. Number 3 there, what are algorithms? What's common is this idea of procedurality or the steps, the set of instructions that you follow, and certain results. I should have underlined certain. I think I did. Something went wrong there. Anyway, so the point being like, given these conditions or given these kind of like variables, if these variables are met, this will be the result, right? The whole kind of dimension of guaranteed outcomes is one that I think is really key here, right? And I think it's the allure of digital computation and algorithmic coding because we can say, like, think about Google Maps, right? You say where you want to go. and it provides, given all the information that exists within Google's knowledge networks or whatever, giving it has much data and information about what's happening on the roads right now, it will give you the route, right? And if you follow that route, given all of it, all it knows about the situation and the circumstances, you will arrive at that given time, that certain guaranteed time, right? So it's a series of steps. It's got all this kind of informational input, and it's got a certain outcome, and we like it. This is anticipating the macro stuff a little bit. The whole point is that we like these guaranteed outcomes. We like these devices because so many of the things that they do are reliable. They're certain. They're predictable even, right? This thing tells you the weather 3 days from now. This thing tells you the stock prices. This thing tells you, so much about what's happening or what's going to happen. And it's also designed to anticipate you as the thing that's happening or is about to happen, right? So algorithms are really about prediction. They're about predicting what's most likely given the amount of data that's been put into them in terms of the variabilities, in terms of the likelihoods of certain outcomes. It's all very mathematical and probabilistic. But the point is that it generates these outputs given these steps under the right conditions, under the right circumstances. I think it's important on number 4 there to point out that an algorithm doesn't have to be a digital thing, right? And so again, we're talking about recipes. A recipe are just words that we can all read written down on a piece of paper, more or less, right? That's not digital. Has nothing to do with computing. We've had recipes well before we've had cookbooks, right? Or we've had instructions on how to, change a tire or heat up a baby bottle or whatever, like different ways of doing things to get a certain kind of outcome, a guaranteed, reliable outcome. Anything that kind of is a set of instructions or procedures for doing that could be considered an algorithm. So, first of all, algorithms are things that don't have to be digital, and they don't have to be associated with computers. The thing is as computing processing power has come along, starting in around the 16th century, he gives us a bit of a history here, is that they've become so much more powerful, and now they're able to do things with algorithms that are quite astonishing. And he even uses the word astonishing at some point in here, right? And so it makes, I think, pretty good sense that computers have kind of adopted algorithms as their main coding action device, let's say. I'm not a computing programmer, so I'm reaching a bit here, right? But we know that algorithms are what is driving so many of our digital devices. So much of our everyday lives, from smart homes to all the stuff that we're surrounded by, our computers, our phones, our laptops, our vehicles, our transactions when we go to a store and the store already knows who we are because we have a history, because we've purchased before. All of that stuff gets used algorithmically to guess, right? You ever pull up a website or go to a place, or you've ordered food from this place before, and it tries to anticipate. Again, prediction is a key driver of all of the tech here. Convenience and prediction. Again, getting at the macro stuff a little bit here, but what is it that kind of authorizes and legitimizes and justifies the continued use of this stuff? It's our values and our preferences for things like reliability, consistency, prediction, ease, right? And speed, of course, right? All of these things that we value are all kind of putting pressure on the generating, the creating, the inventing of more of this kind of stuff. So again, it makes good sense that this phenomenon, algorithms as such, precedes computing and precedes digitality, but digitality and computing power have kind of capitalized on algorithms and have done more and more and more, right? All right, so number 5 on the notes here, we get into these metaphors. They're interesting, but he doesn't really do much with the metaphors, and so he kind of introduces them and talks about how these 3 different metaphors might be useful ways of thinking about algorithms, but then he kind of drops it and moves on there. So we won't get too bogged down. I love the questions that he asks on the bottom left on 64 there. Those are really good questions. Keep those in mind. Now, the main thing that we really want to kind of focus on here is the sections on mattering and the section that talks about the 3 tiers, right? So the mattering stuff is really about how algorithms are rhetorical. Algorithms influence, they shape, they determine, they funnel, they channel, they push, they encourage. The language interesting here, isn't it? It's very much like Davis on artifacts, right? So you can think of an algorithm as an artifact, and you can think about the mechanisms that are built into it. That's the micro level of analysis. And then you can think about the conditions that go into the usage of it. And there you could be thinking about the macro, right? So I was thinking about Davis quite a bit when I was reading through his tiers, which I suppose we can quickly talk about now. The tiers, there's 3 tiers. He's saying, first of all, he's saying algorithms are rhetorical. He's saying that they're rhetorical because they make things matter to users, to people, right? They make that journey from my home to the restaurant matter to me because it makes the most sense. It's clearest. It has a set of easy to follow directions in front of me, right? So it matters. The stock market makes the little thing going up and down. It makes the economy matter to me. All of the notifications that make my phone light up and buzz and ding and whistle and teet and tweet and blah, 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 bing, bong, ding, ding, right? Pinball. All of that stuff makes communication matter, makes other people out there matter. They like my story or my post or my photo or whatever. Oh, now it matters to me. So this whole business of making things matter is the rhetorical business of creating salience, creating an immediacy, right? And so therefore algorithms do have that rhetorical valence to them. And then of course the business of the tiers is like, all right, now how can we think more specifically about the ways in which algorithms do in fact make things matter? He breaks it down nicely and explains that breakdown at some length. I just want to get to the 3 tiers. We got the macro, the meso, and the micro. And he explains his ordering a little bit. I don't want to go through that. I just want to talk about the 3 categories. And on page 70, he's got a chart kind of laying everything out. Macro, as the word suggests, is about kind of the broadest sphere of activity that we can think about here. I just think about this as the culture of pro-tech discourse, right? As he talks about in here, when we talk about macro, we're talking about capital D discourse, right? Like big, broad social discourse. How it is that we talk about tech, how it is that we think about tech, how it is that we think about devices, how it is that we think and talk about the things that devices do. And as I was reading through this section here, I wrote the word convenience up on the top of page 71 there. One of these days I'm going to write this thing, or I'm going to write it with someone else, which is like the damage that the single word convenience or the trope of convenience has done in this century in terms of our food system, in terms of tech, in terms of so much of like the damage that has been done in our lives. Most of it happens because of this trope, this language, this idea of convenience. Everything's got to be simpler, quicker, cheaper, faster, smoother, more immediate, more reliable, convenient. Anything that causes any blip of discomfort or slowness or consideration or reflection, bad, get it away, right? So algorithms and digital computing go perfectly into this mix, right? Because what's more convenient than being able to serve up results in an instant, right? Like think about Google's search engine. You put in a word, how much stuff just pops up. It's incredible, right? That's a good thing. We value those things. So the culture that values convenience, that values speed, instantaneity, automated processes, right? That's the macro sphere. Now, we're not talking about algorithms specifically and directly, but we're talking about kind of the whole world that algorithms create or are a part of, right? To the extent that we all love that, to the extent that advertisers create messages about how important convenience is and how much we love convenience and devices and gadgets. They're a little bit smaller because we love convenience, or they're a little bit bigger this year because we love convenience. It's opposite arguments, but we still use the language of convenience, right? So I think that's a pretty good way to think about the macro dimension, which is not directly about algorithms, but it's about the kind of the world that algorithms help us realize. How we talk about social media, how we talk about devices, convenience, ease, usage, whatever. I'm thinking about Meta. I'm thinking about the goggles and how these things are going to keep coming, and they're going to get simpler and lighter and smaller. And before you know it, we're all going to be wearing stuff. And convenience, 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 right? All right, so that's macro. Meso, and here's where I thought it might be useful to bring in an analogy, like, because algorithms are hard to visualize. But think about a car, right? Well, instead of an algorithm, think of a car. Again, artifact. It could be an algorithm. It could be a vehicle. Same kind of consideration. So if you think about, instead of algorithms, cars, you can talk about car culture. You can talk about the culture of cars. You can talk about speed, power, slickness, all on and on and on and on. That's the macro dimension. The meso dimension is thinking about like automobility as such, or cars as such, or automotives as such, as a kind of category, as a kind of broad thing. We're talking about a specific thing, but we're talking about the entire scope of that thing in all of its permutations, right? So you can talk at the meso level about algorithms as such, as a phenomenon. That is a specific here. We're looking at this algorithm. We're looking at algorithms as the thing that they are, right? And there we look at, what's he say here, the meso. We're looking at algorithms per se. We're looking at identification, ontology, and techne, right? So techne is this business of skills and rules and the kind of the hardwiring of conduct, of behavior. So we can talk about algorithms at that level, the way we could talk about cars, gas cars, electric cars, what's better, what's worse, right? Speed versus comfort versus safety versus size versus cheap value versus engineering, on and on and on. We could talk at great length about cars as such, right? Well, same with algorithms. We could talk at great length about algorithms as such, and the rhetorical kind of dimensions and properties of them, and that's the meso level. Finally, the micro level. Now, if we can talk about cars as such, we could also talk about my car that's in the garage, or we could talk about my wife's truck that's in the parking lot right now. That's a particular specific iteration of the thing itself, right? And then we could look at any given car or any given algorithm, and we could say that is how this particular thing is working, right? So one of the examples Chris gives is Amazon's review ranking algorithm, right? Something is determining, whenever I write a review on Amazon, I don't, people do, right? Something will determine how it goes up and down. Now you can pack in that algorithm, those determinations, with values like, I don't know, however many reviews that person has already written. If you've written a whole bunch of reviews, maybe your review goes up. Maybe it's based on how much money you've spent at Amazon. Maybe that's what drives it up. Whatever it is, and this is, again, where Davis comes in, because these kinds of considerations, these kinds of biases and values and so on that are seemingly external to the artifact actually come in and shape the thing itself, which in turn shapes what comes out of it, right? Algorithms are not neutral. Nothing's neutral. I used this example in my last video. Nothing is neutral. Everything is made by humans. I still remember the year or the moment when I realized I was a young boy, or getting older, and I realized that airplanes were made by humans. Humans are fallible. Like, these things could drop out of the sky at any minute. Like, humans make mistakes all the time, and we're flying in this thing in the sky, right? Same kind of idea is like flawed, fallible humans with their blindnesses and their biases create algorithms that sort the world in certain ways, right? And those ways are not neutral, right? They have valenced, biased, shaped, determined kind of responses. Now, some of those determinations might be very innocuous and meaningless, right? In terms of like the ranking of reviews or whatever. But a lot more of them could have to do with more existential kinds of questions, or more law and order type questions, or more surveillance type questions, and intrusions, and getting things wildly wrong and mistaking this for that or whatever, right? So there's all kinds of potential kind of problems that can come in with algorithms. I have a book on my shelves here somewhere like sort of the dark side of algorithms and how they can sort of function in ways that are exclusionary or discriminatory or even racist, right? And it can happen even if the person who coded the algorithm wasn't themselves trying to generate this result. But blindness is, right? Being unaware of what you're coding into something and how it's carrying your assumptions and your values and your limited life experience at the expense of others, that can generate uneven results, right? So there's lots of things that need to be considered here in terms of the messaging and in terms of these automated processes that are creating results and making things matter, and matter in specific ways. And that's important. Let's see, I need to wrap up here. We've talked about the tiers. That theme on number 9 of concealment. I've been talking in my research for some time now about this phenomenon of invisible influence, which is really what got me interested in algorithms. Invisible influence, right? They exert huge amounts of influence over us. They make things easier, but they also channel us in certain directions, and maybe we wouldn't have gone in that direction if it weren't so easy and convenient, right? And so this is what I would consider invisible influence. And not all invisible influences are ones that we need to be completely freaked out about. But, like my wife's allergic to, what is it, the red 40 or something. And if there's she can't have licorice because sometimes there'll be traces of that dye, red dye 40, red 40. So a lot of times there's things in things that we don't know and can't see or smell or taste or recognize or whatever that are exerting influence. And we might not want that influence. We might not want to be pushed in certain ways or funneled or channeled or blocked or encouraged or discouraged. Again, you can do that artifact analysis with algorithms quite effectively, I think. So gosh, there's so much more that I would love to get into. I didn't even really read much into the essay. I didn't want to get kind of pulled into it because there's a lot in here. And there's a lot of I've marked this thing up pretty extensively. But those are the main ideas, and I hope that you understand or appreciate or recognize the kind of the rhetoricity of algorithms. Even if we can't see or smell or point to an algorithm, we can see the effects all over us. And this idea, again, of kind of what gets designed into the thing, whether the thing is a water bottle or a vehicle or an algorithm, and then how users engage that, and thinking about the context, the macro context that Davis is also wanting to talk about in terms of conditions, right? All that stuff that kind of gets filtered into the thing that's shaping the behaviors. There's a looping effect here, which we might not love. We might not care, but some of us might not love the idea that we're being kind of encouraged to follow these looping patterns. Anyway, gang, that's getting a little long, so I'll probably try to edit this down. I'm fascinated by this stuff. I hope you are as well. It's important. It's relevant. It's now. I'm trying to think about the rhetoric side of it all. So that's it, gang. Hang in there. Hope all is well. I'm going to have those last quizzes graded real soon, and we will finish off in style. So, peace.